Emperor Obama is at it again when it comes to upending the Constitution. I know, you're sick and tired of hearing that. Packed inside the 2,400-page monstrosity known as Obamacare is carefully placed wording that makes it nearly impossible, keyword nearly impossible, to get rid of the Independent Payment Advisory Board. The IPAB is the 15-person panel appointed by the White House and the Senate, and its job is to dictate which procedures doctors and hospitals will be able to use in order to cut costs. This is what people are talking about when you hear the phrase death panels, because the board members will be able to limit your care if you cost too much. Now, let me cut through this. Here's what it means. Congress will only be able to repeal the IPAB during a very small 7-month window in the year 2017. Now, they're going to need both houses of Congress. Who knows who's going to be in control of both houses of Congress in 2017 unless the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and offer this to the president for signature. There's almost no way to repeal the IPAB. After that short window, the law bans Congress from ever being able to repeal the board. So if Romney wins in November and the law is technically repealed, the board won't be able to be repealed until 2017. Now, I'd love for a progressive to explain to me how that is constitutional. And don't tell me the Supreme Court already said it was constitutional. That part? You know, when Republicans say Obamacare was jammed through Congress, this is exactly what they're talking about. First of all, today's current Congress can't tell a Congress in the future that it can't act on a law. They just can't do that. That is what Congress does. The sitting Congress, that is. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution vests all legislative powers herein granted to the Congress. And second, Congress is responsible for budgets and has the power of the purse. But Obamacare says Congress can only override the IPAB decisions on health care savings if it comes up with equivalent savings. That goes directly against Congress's budgetary powers. This is what the progressives do. If they don't like what the Constitution says, they just find a way around it. Joining me to discuss this from Washington, D.C. is the Director of Health Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, Michael Cannon. How you doing, sir?
I'm all right. How are you?
I want to start with this shocking little detail from the Washington Examiner. Turns out Sam Walton, one of the heirs to the Walmart family or Walton family fortune, gave Obama money in 2008. I believe it was $40,000, $30,800 in 2008, and $40,000 this time around to the Obama Victory Fund. And the Washington Examiner is reporting that, boy, Walmart really stands to gain if Obamacare stands because it imposes such massive costs on their competition.
It does. In fact, I was sitting in a cab with a lobbyist from Walmart, and I was shocked when she told me that Walmart supports the employer tax that Obamacare imposes on large employers. I thought Walmart would be hit by this. Why would they support that? She explained that Target's health benefits costs are lower, and so the tax would be even stiffer or be more likely to be imposed on Target. They would suffer more, and Walmart would benefit as a result. So there's this huge myth out there that big government and big business are enemies. In fact, they are collaborators. They collude in order to help each other, and they do it at the expense of entrepreneurs. They do it at the expense of consumers.
So if they beat the spread, they support it, and if they don't, they don't. Let me ask you about this narrow window that can't be opened until 2017, and Congress can't repeal the IPAB until that window, and you'll need both houses of Congress to do it. How is that? My God, how is that at all constitutional?
Well, it's not, and it's so unconstitutional, it's absurdly constitutional. It's more than that. It's anti-constitutional. It may be the most anti-constitutional law that Congress has ever passed. Look, I don't like the idea of a death panel more than anyone else does. I don't like the idea of the government telling you what treatments you can and cannot get. But the fact that IPAB is a so-called death panel is not the scariest part, because remember, if you have a government program like Medicare and there is no attempt to reduce Medicare expenditures on wasteful services, then you're going to have a Medicare program like the one we have right now, which is so expensive that you're forcing people to pay such high taxes that you're destroying jobs and opportunities for people and keeping people in poverty and so forth. So, but I think what's really dangerous about IPAB is that it's an anti-constitutional super legislature that Congress has created that will be able to pass laws that will become law without Congress's approval, and even if Congress would never have passed them itself. And if Congress fails to repeal IPAB through that very bizarre and unconstitutional procedure you were mentioning in 2017, then IPAB will be able to go on legislating forever, according to Obamacare anyway, and Congress won't ever be able to interfere with the laws that IPAB has passed. This is, it boggles the mind just how hostile this IPAB is and Obamacare is to the Constitution, and it really exemplifies what Friedrich Hayek was predicting in 1944 when he said that a society that puts government in the position of trying to plan the economy is going to end up with a more authoritarian form of government, because government fails in its efforts to plan the economy, which is what has happened with Medicare and other government efforts to plan the healthcare sector. And the government, did supporters of Medicare ever say, well, it was a huge mistake, you know, our ideology is flawed and we have to backtrack? No, they say the problem is that government doesn't have more power. What we need is we need to give government more power, and that'll solve these problems, and that's what IPAB does.
You know, if you're under 40, you might want to go back and listen to Ronald Reagan's 1961 speech on YouTube and hear him quote then socialists about the way to control the people is through health care. Let me ask you this, Michael. How did this get past the Supreme Court case? How did the challengers and the Supreme Court justices themselves not see this?
Well, the Supreme Court was only asked to look at two discrete questions. One was the individual mandate, and one was the Medicaid mandate. They struck down the Medicaid mandate. They upheld the individual mandate. They weren't asked about this at all. And there are dozens of other lawsuits challenging other parts of Obamacare that are working their way through the courts right now. And a couple of them could really strike a fatal blow against this law. But one of them that probably won't is the IPAB suit. That if that is successful, then the courts will strike down this part of the law. But that won't really affect the rest of the law. The rest of the law will remain intact. But even if the courts don't strike down IPAB, no matter what Obamacare says, Congress can repeal IPAB whenever it wants. The House has already voted a couple of times to completely repeal IPAB, and that's because one Congress cannot bind a future Congress through legislation. Only the Constitution can do that.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for joining us. If you think the bureaucracies are out of control, wait till we get a taste of IPAB.